Hi, I'm Sarah from the upcoming. Such a pleasure to be able to speak to you again. Of course,
Hi,
I spoke to you recently
Sarah.
about Code of Silence, but today we're talking about Confession. Maybe you can just kick off with a brief introduction to this film. I mean, it's totally unique in the sense that it kind of plays out almost in real time,
Yeah,
in almost one location. So, what can people expect if they come to see Confession?
um, it was one of those interesting situations where um, we were, everybody, first lockdown, was sitting at home. You know, in my personal experience, I was sitting at home teaching my children Zoom because everybody was home from school and we were Zoom teaching. And David Beaton, who's an old friend of mine, writer director, sort of texted me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Teaching my kids." And he went, "I've got an idea. I'm going to write something." And literally 2 weeks later, he sent me this script. And it's like, he said, "I've tried to contain it to one principal location with a few actors, but with as many sort of plot twists and interesting turns, and I really set myself a target." And I read it and I couldn't believe how contained and brilliantly sort of constructed it was. And then over the next few weeks, and we worked on sort of aspects of it, but it was pretty strong already. And it's about a man who finds himself in a really difficult situation, and I mean, so hard to talk about without giving anything away, but he ends up at this church, and there is a reason that he's gone there. He's already, like, at the top of the movie. He's already suffering. He runs into this church with a bullet wound, and it all takes place in the next like hour and a half that happened from that moment. The amazing Colm Meaney plays the priest who's in the church about to lock it up on it's a Friday evening in Boston, and it all plays out from that moment. And I just thought Dave had done a fantastic job of constructing these sort of fascinating, interesting characters with past lives that other people learn, the audience plus the people that they're talking to learn about in real time. And and we had discussed who we would try to get to play Father Peter, and Colm was right at the top of the list. And so when Colm was available, that was amazing. We were super low budget. We shot it in 12 days. It was during the second lockdown. So it was very, very sort of tight and masked. And me and Colm were the only people without masks on. And the other thing, we managed to get Claire Hope Asherty, who's an old friend of mine. And Claire is a brilliant actress, but over here people don't even realize Claire's English because her American is so good. And so that was really great because we're old friends, and so she came in and we hadn't seen each other for a while, so that it was just lovely. And it's grafting, when you're doing these big long thriller scenes and you've got 12 days to shoot it. It's really hard, and you're crunching, and there's one take between myself and Colm that was a 27-minute take, and so it's also like sort of doing a play, and you're playing off each other's energies, and it was great stuff, and I thought Dave did a great job.
That was going to be my next question, actually, was kind of what were the highs and lows of shooting in such an intense atmosphere, because it's not quite a one-take film, but it almost feels like that at times, like the just running through such lengths of the script, almost in one go, and you're there and you're kind of obviously on the verge of dying, so it's quite a labored
that was hard.
Wow.
that was really hard, because obviously he has been shot, and I mean, that's in the trailer, so it's not too much of a spoiler. But that's hard because one of the things that we were very cognizant of was, you know, I did quite a lot of research into the kind of shot, where it would be, how it would feel, what you'd be able to do, functioning wise, how the adrenaline dumps happen, you know, and so, but obviously, the actor in you kind of wants to be playing and out of it, but you can't do that because you've got 3 pages of dialogue to get out. So because obviously also you're aware, you know, there's a thriller and there's loads of twists and turns, and you want it to still have that aspect to it that's exciting, and so that the audience, you know, because the audience are learning things at the same time as. So if I'm talking, the audience are learning things at the same time Colm is, and if Colm's talking, I'm learning things at the same time that the audience is, and occasionally the audience are a little bit ahead as well, because the audience learn things that the other people don't know, which is, you know, it's good storytelling and thriller stuff. But doing all of that whilst dying is, or whilst sort of wounded, is quite difficult. So all of those things are things that you sort of take into consideration when you're plotting. But because we shot it in 12 days, we're also aware we just got to get the lines out. So, you know, so I did, you know, one of the joys of being of shooting it during lockdown was that I had come back from Bulgaria where I was filming, and I'd had to quarantine for 10 days when I arrived back from Bulgaria in England. And for an actor, that's a dream, because everybody's like, oh my God, you had to stay inside for 10 days. And I'm like, yeah, it's perfect. It's because you just literally sit and you work, you know. And personally, that's exactly what I need, because if somebody's not tying me to my desk, I'll be outside running around finding other jobs to do, you know? So it's really good to have the discipline of having to do it.
And, you know, you're mentioning working with Colm Meaney, and he's just one of these actors that we've just sort of seen in so many different roles, such a familiar face on our screens. And, you know, what do you think it is that makes him really stand out as an actor? And every role, he seems to just, you know, be so completely the character we see. So what was it like working with him? And what do you think makes him so great?
It was absolutely lovely. You know, I've always been a massive fan of his. You know, all the Roddy Doyle films, from The Commitments and The Van and etc. You know, through Con Air and whatever. You know, I like tore his ear off getting him to tell me fun stories about Malkovich and, you know, shit like that. We were living next to each other, so because it was the second lockdown, everything was closed and no restaurants open. They put us in this little sort of country club, and we had these 2 little wooden cottages next to each other. So we'd get home from work, or, you know, just before we started working, we'd meet up, we'd read through the scenes, talk about what we were trying to achieve. We tended to stay in accent when we were working the whole time, and that I find that very helpful. And sometimes it's difficult that when you're with people who, like you're with an English crew, for example, and you're playing American, you feel like you want to be one of the boys, but you're having to stay in your accent. And so that was great, because Colm and I did that, and we'd go for walks. We were on this golf course that was closed. We were the only people there. And so we'd go for a walk around the course, you know, literally wouldn't see another human, and at the weekends. And then maybe I had a big speech that he'd test me on, or he'd have a big speech that I'd test him on, and stuff. And it was just lovely. It was just lovely spending that time with somebody that you admire so much. We got on brilliantly, and like anything, it's easy to say in hindsight, I'd have loved another week, you know. you know, because it's like I just directed something. We did it in 17 days, and every time I've seen a movie, we've got the screeners through at the moment for this year's, you know, movies, and I watch films and go, oh my god, the budget, they have money, they could do that. They probably spent like 3 days shooting that one scene, you know, and we're doing 3 or 4 scenes per day, you know, and you get 1 take or 2 takes, and you know, and you'll move on. So yeah, there's no question that in any of the work that I've done over the last year and a half, that I wouldn't have taken more time if we'd had it. You know, I've got Last Survivors coming out, which is a film I did with Alicia Silverstone and Drew Van Acker, and that, again, you know, I left Confession and flew to Montana, had a week in a hotel room, and then shot all my stuff in Montana. And that was a tiny shoot. And if you see that movie, the scope of it's gigantic, you know, and yet you're really rushing. It was freezing. It was like -2, -3, -4 degrees, down to -10 at times, and -20 on a couple of days. And we're outside in the snow, but you've only got a certain amount of time to shoot a sequence before you move on to the next one, and so you're up against the clock with that as well. But hoping the camera doesn't seize up because it's so cold.
And so what do you hope that people take away from watching Confession? Because I think one of the interesting things about it, I mean, it's like the very definition of a slow burn thriller, yet we're constantly kept on the edge of our seats and second guessing, you know, how we're supposed to view these characters. You know, is Victor the good guy, the bad guy? You know, is the priest who he seems or isn't he? And maybe it also has something to say about how when we reach the end of our lives, or we know reaching the end of our lives, we suddenly want to go back, and, you know, we have those regrets and those things we wish we could undo. And maybe there's a message in there for people not to wait till it's too late to go and kind of repair things, whether that be with family or whoever. So what do you think people take away?
I think those scars that we have, but it feels easier not to deal with. It's funny, I was talking to my eldest daughter yesterday about something, and it was just a little story that we were talking about, and it had come from, you know, a journalistic piece that I'm doing about favorite songs, and I started telling her this about the song. I said, actually, there's a really interesting story about where that song leads. I'm not going to tell it now because it's kind of personal. And I told her where I first heard the song, and then I told her about where that had led, and I told her about somebody that I'd met who loved that song too, and it had become a sort of friendship. And it ended up with me and her, my daughter, last night, Googling that person who I haven't seen for 30 years, right? And it's so interesting. It's so interesting that that we think it's easier in the short term to not deal with these things. You know, not whatever it is, whether it's boyfriends, girlfriends, friendships, fleeting people who sort of had an effect on you or touched you in some way, you know. And I think if you know, Anna and I have been together for like 14 years, and there's one thing that Anna's taught me, it's like get your shit out. Just talk about it, get it out, do the thing, deal with it. Don't put it under the carpet, because you end up with a really lumpy carpet that you're going to keep tripping over, you know. So I think that in Victor's case, my character in Confession, he is as you know, having seen it, he's hiding a lot, and he's trying to do the right thing all the time. What he thinks is the right thing, but that has consequences for him and his family in his past, and so yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, because I think certainly like that conversation last night made me think I've got to, you know, it's like that classic thing of making amends along the way so you don't have to make them later, you know, making amends as they happen rather than holding this stuff, you know. You know, and it's interesting because I think Colm would say the same thing. We talked about this a lot. We talked about the things that there's a certain element of masculinity, and not necessarily toxic masculinity, but masculinity in that you bottle it up and you don't talk about it. You hold in all the things, you know, to protect others. You know, I do this as a dad a lot. You know, you protect others by not telling them the difficult stuff, and you wear it. But that has an effect on you. You know, because your lumpy carpet is literally inside. You know, so yeah, I think. But there are certain things that Victor would not have been able to share, and that's classic dramatic obstacles, right? So the best characters to play are the ones who have got the dramatic obstacles that can't be imparted to others, that have to be hidden, otherwise it could affect people in a really difficult way. So how does that affect you when you're having to hold these things that could really hurt someone or whatever, you know? I think it's a really interesting film, but I think it's but I think you're right. If some of those things had been dealt with right at the beginning, you wouldn't have had this issue in the first place. But you wouldn't have the drama.
Well, yeah, indeed. I think I'm out of time, but yeah, so you've got this out on the 31st, but like you said, also, what's it called? Last Survivors.
Last Survivors. It's February 4th,
February 4th.
Yeah.
And you said you've also been directing, is that right?
Yeah, I've got a film that I'm just we're very close to picture locking, that Anna's the lead in, and Ray Winston plays her dad. And it's really beautiful, and we'll be going out to festivals in a couple of months, and applying sort of across the board to the festivals that would be sort of coming up in that period of time, and then we'll see what happens from there. Really excited about it. I'm very proud of it. Anna's amazing in it. Ray is amazing in it. So, and Pippa Bennett-Warner and Yusuf Kakur, it would be remiss of me not to mention them, because they're amazing too.
Amazing. Well, you've definitely been busy. So congratulations on all that amazing work that you've been able to put out. And it's been lovely to chat to you again. So thanks so much for your time. Cheers.
All right, darling.
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice evening.